What's up, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls around the world? I would like to welcome you back to the Real Talk with Zuby podcast. On today's episode, we have got on another special guest. He is the founder of the Live Free Academy. And this is, of course, John Bush. Welcome to the show, man. How you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Awesome, man. John, I've done a brief intro there, but for people who are not familiar with you and your work, please introduce yourself.
Sure. So my name's John. I hail from Central Texas. I've been doing freedom activism in one form or another for 22 years now. So more than half my adult life. And in that time, I've gone through the politics, yelling at government buildings, got arrested for activism a couple times. Then I had kiddos and realized I need to stay the heck out of jail. But I came to realize that if we want to create freedom in our lives, the best route is to live as free people, to take responsibility for creating that freedom, not rely on politicians to do the right thing, not expect 51% of the American public to all of a sudden wake up and value freedom and privacy and bodily autonomy. And we've been pursuing this strategy called exit and build, where we exit the systems that we disagree with, the systems that are basically trying to enslave us, and we build alternative systems that are more in alignment with our values. So, that's what I've been up to lately.
I hear that, man. Well, let's run it back a little bit, man. I'm curious to know more about your background. How did you become to be this person who cares so much about freedom? Tell me a little bit about your story.
Well, I guess I was a bit of a rebel growing up and getting in trouble in high school. I remember they instituted this tardy table policy where even if you're a minute late, you got to go get this detention and then you got to sit out during lunch. But we organized this big protest. It was shortly after Columbine, actually. And they're like, you got to end this protest. The FBI could get involved. There was this shooting that just happened. Anyway, so I've always been a bit of a rebel. And what red-pilled me, so to speak, is watching a documentary by old Alex Jones called 9/11 Road to Tyranny. This was in 2002, shortly after 9/11 happened. That was just a big eye-opener that led me down the rabbit hole, researching the conspiratorial view of history. In college, a few good things came out of college. I learned how to research, had a good time meeting some people, living it up, really. That was probably the best part of college. But I started getting involved in activism. So started an American Civil Liberties Union chapter and started to learn about the U.S. Constitution, the Bill of Rights. And then I was introduced to libertarianism from Ron Paul during his campaign, 2007, 2008. And like I was sharing, we did politics for a while. We were actually really good at politics. We had local ordinances passed to stop police officers from being trained to do blood withdrawals on the side of the road for like a DWI stop. We had state legislation passed in Texas to limit fusion centers. That's this Department of Homeland Security information gathering, intelligence sharing system, to limit their ability to gather political, religious, or social information on people like activists. But what I realized was like all the while, we weren't creating greater freedom for ourselves. We were simply slowing the growth of tyranny. And that was rather unsatisfactory. Shortly thereafter, I learned about Bitcoin and really saw the revolutionary potential of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency in general. It was part of the End the Fed movement and had the realization, like, if we want to end the Fed, we need to limit our use of Federal Reserve notes and start using these alternatives. And the whole time as well, I had a reverence for homesteading. And right now, the smart city agenda is accelerating. Like a panopticon society is being built in just about every single major city. There's all sorts of great arts and culture and restaurants and live music to go to. But, if we really value freedom, we got to recognize if we're just stuck in the city as crap hits the fan, or as this slow frog in the boiling pot transition to the Great Reset takes place, we are definitely going to be limited, especially if there's another lockdown, right? So we encourage people at our event, this Exit and Build Land Summit, we encourage people to exit the cities, buy land, and build community in the country. And so lately, cryptocurrency, counter economics, helping people to trade outside the system to prepare for the CBDCs, and then helping people to leave the cities, to build community, to become more independent in the country. That's been the two focuses of my work at Live Free Academy.
Our podcast today is sponsored by the Exit and Build Land Summit. I've been speaking out about the Great Reset for several years, and many people are especially concerned about so-called smart cities being pushed by the World Economic Forum. They're designed to watch everything you do, harvest your data, and regulate every part of your life. I'm an urban dweller myself, but I'm not interested in going through another lockdown, eating bugs, or living in a pod. No thanks. That's why friend of the show John Bush created the Exit and Build Land Summit back in 2021. It's helped tens of thousands of people around the world to exit cities and suburbs and build a better, freer life in the country. It's one of the largest gatherings of top homesteaders, permaculturists, and community builders in America. This year's summit will feature J.P. Sears, Joel Salatin, David Holmgren, and dozens of other world-class speakers. If you want to learn how to move to the country, raise healthy food and animals on a homestead, or create or join an intentional community, then you should check it out. The event is live May 17th to 19th, so sign up with a free pass, a virtual pass, or attend in person in Bastrop, Texas for an unforgettable experience. Go to exitandbuildlandsummit.com to sign up today. That's exitandbuildlandsummit.com.
What are the greatest threats to freedom that you see right now? I mean, you've touched on a few things right there, but I think for listeners who are not so familiar with some of these ideas and who are so far down the rabbit hole of, I don't know, whether it's, if you say smart city to the average person, right, that doesn't sort of raise any alarm bells. But when you're talking, or even talking about CBDCs, I would be surprised if the average person on the street even knows what CBDC means, because most people are not in this world. So can you explain what some of these things mean and what the actual legitimate threats to freedom are that people may not be aware of?
Sure. So we could point to this movement or this effort called the Great Reset. And so the World Economic Forum, which is this organization, like a think tank of oligarchs, media moguls, politicians, bankers, the financial technocrats, essentially, they're wanting to reshape life as we know it, with an emphasis on food, energy, money. And they want to reshape life and society, business, and push forward what they call the fourth industrial revolution. And of course, Klaus Schwab, right? A lot of people have seen Klaus Schwab and the Great Reset. Not a lot of people on the street, I should say. And this is a big concern because what they're aiming to do essentially is leverage technology in order to better surveil and control people. And, I'm trying to speak in terms of folks that are just regularly going about their business on the street. But the one thing that I've come to recognize is, unfortunately, there's a huge mass of people that are caught in what Napoleon Hill refers to as a hypnotic rhythm. They're drifting. This is all from this great book called Outwitting the Devil I've been reading recently. So you have the drifters and you have the driven. You have those that live in fear and those that have faith that everything's going to be okay. They can control their life. They have a definiteness of purpose. But a lot of folks are just caught in this hypnotic rhythm and they don't even have a desire to understand these things. But practically speaking, the threat of, and to go back, the Great Reset is where this smart city agenda is really being accelerated. Same thing with central bank digital currencies. And so the big threat, of course, is that people's behavior will be controlled. There'll be privileges that are threatened to be withdrawn. People will have penalties and punishments if they don't go along with this new agenda. Specifically speaking, we got a glimpse of it, of course, with what happened during COVID, where people were pressured to take this medical procedure. And if they didn't, they would have their livelihood taken from them. Potentially, they would be fired in certain instances. We also see this big old push for environmental controls. So environmentalism is another like attack vector. And I'm a big fan of being a permaculturalist and living in harmony with the planet. But unfortunately, through a lot of United Nations programs, World Economic Forum, they're using environmentalism as a ruse to implement this agenda. So another thing the World Economic Forum is pushing is this My Pass, where it's basically everyone has a personal carbon allowance. And once you exceed a certain level of carbon output for the month or the period or the quarter, then perhaps it's more expensive for you to purchase a plane ticket, or with this 15-minute city thing that's being rolled out in some cities, especially in the UK. And I think it was Oxford, I believe. You're not able to leave this certain part of your city unless you have a green light on the My Pass, right? That's where these things are going. So it's all about controlling behavior through surveillance, social credit scores like they have in China. And then, of course, the CBDC, the central bank digital currency. This will be an effort to make all money digital, which most money is digital now. But in addition to being digital, it'll be more easily surveilled. And then there'll be like this smart contract aspect to where perhaps if you go to the wrong protest, like we saw with the Canadian trucker movement, then your ability to do business will be limited or barred altogether. And then this will be, of course, coupled with this whole environmental carbon thing where you won't be able to purchase that plane ticket, or you won't be able to buy gasoline at the gas station outside of the city, or maybe there'll be electric vehicles by then. So it's just definitely moving away from freedom, away from autonomy, away from personal choice, and towards a whole lot of control, coercion, and social engineering of the public.
Mm. Now, obviously, you know that I'm very much on your side of this, but to play devil's advocate a bit here, or to do a thought experiment, why do you think it is that these entities, whether this is the World Economic Forum or any of these other think tanks, nonprofits, whatever this sort of group of somewhat coordinated individuals and people are, do you think that deep down their motives are intentionally malicious? Or do you think that they have a messed up worldview that just doesn't value freedom, and they think that they're doing right by the environment and humanity with all these? What is your personal perception of that?
That's a great question. And, of course, we can use their own words, but, this is my theory or speculation as to what their motives would be. So a lot of things that take place that are more treacherous or conspiratorial, there's a lot of compartmentalization. And it was, what's his name? The gentleman that is the nephew of Sigmund Freud, and he wrote the book Propaganda, Public Relations. I can't recall his name at the moment, but this guy put forward this proposition that in order to control people, in order to influence people, we don't need to control everyone. We only need to capture those influential institutions in society, like academia, the intellectuals, the politicians, the media, for example. And then things will just kind of go top down from there. And so I believe for the most part, most of the technocrats, when I say technocrats, technocracy is like this form of governance that uses science and algorithms in order to make decisions for people. These technocrats, they think that they're doing what's best for humanity and civilization and the environment because that's what they've learned. And they don't question what they've learned. And of course, we saw this play out during COVID with the public health experts. Many of them are just doing what they were taught. Like the medical industry doesn't really learn a whole lot about nutrition, for example. And they think the best thing they could do to help their patients is to prescribe the latest prescription. So I think that's one piece. I do think that there is a smaller group that is more influential, that is most definitely acting in their own self-interest. And, to get a little more conspiratorial, perhaps there's a bit of a megalomaniacal angle to it. Mm-hmm. I do think that when you study history, the way that I see history is like a series and cycle of revolutions where there's one group in power and then another group topples the other group through war, through conquest. Now, of course, nowadays, I think the wars are going to be more financial, more socially engineered, where it's not going to have to be such a physical confrontation. But I think that there's a small group of people, families, powerful elite families that have realized we can end this cycle of revolutions if we really institute a social engineering campaign and we lock people down, we control people, and we make it basically impossible for people to revolt. And I think that's what's taken place in communist China, for example, where generations have passed now, where a lot of people don't question government. In fact, if you do question government, you're in for a world of hurt. So I think most of the people that are carrying out this quote unquote agenda are just, they think that they're doing their God's gift to humanity, but there are a smaller few that are kind of steering things for the purpose of maintaining their position of dominance over society.
Yeah, I hear that absolutely. That's very similar to my perspective.
Real quick, Edward L. Bernays was the guy I was trying to mention earlier. Edward L. Bernays, it just came to me. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No problem at all, man. Yeah, I tend to think that the higher you go up the pyramid, the greater the percentage of malicious thought. I think that the further down you are, you get more into useful idiot, I'm just following orders, I'm just doing my job category. But if you go right up to the top of the orchestrators and the engineers, I don't think these are stupid people. I think these are extremely smart people, which is how they've risen so high in the hierarchy in many cases to begin with. But I don't think that they are generally pro-human let alone pro-liberty. And some of them are willing to kind of say that outright if you're willing to actually listen to them. So tell me a little bit more about CBDCs. I'm familiar with that, but I'm sure there's going to be people listening who maybe they've heard the term, but they don't really know what that means. So what are CBDCs and why are they a threat?
Okay, so CBDCs, that's a central bank digital currency. So if folks have studied, in all honesty, I've been doing this whole conspiracy thing, like I shared, for over 20 years. And back in the day, I always have this tendency to kind of say, like, if it sounds kind of crazy, blah blah blah. But nowadays, a lot of the stuff that we predicted or we studied, and again, we're just reading internal documents, not to get all Alex Jones, right? But they say it in their own words what their plans are. And these individuals, they have a definiteness of purpose. These organizations and institutions, they carry forward and they're pretty dang successful with their plans. Meanwhile, the masses are struggling to make ends meet, incapable of putting a good logical argument together often. And it just is no wonder why the enemies of freedom are just driving the ball down the field. So a lot of the work that we do, we work in mindset and spiritual practice and like becoming the best version of yourself, because we do have our work cut out for us. But if you dive deeper into some of these organizations, for the longest time, they wanted to have a cashless society so that they could control people. Because like it or not, we live in an economic world, buying and selling goods and services, food, housing our family. And if you can take away people's ability to conduct business freely amongst themselves outside of the government or these technocrats' control, then you're really able to socially engineer the public to change their behavior in many ways. So we now have the technology for these folks to actually pull this off. And the iteration of this cashless society is known as central bank digital currencies. This is in contrast to decentralized cryptocurrencies, of course. Like Bitcoin, for example, it's a decentralized system that's permissionless. This will be a digital currency, the central bank digital currencies, but it'll be controlled by central banks, like the Federal Reserve, for example. And so essentially, most of the financial transactions and the money that people use all over the world, especially maybe less so in developing countries, it's digital already. Venmo, PayPal, checking account transfer, even with a check, when you write a paper check, there's a transference from one bank to another in the Federal Reserve Clearinghouse. But they want to do away with cash, paper money, which makes it easier for people to do business privately or to give someone a cash tip that they can take under the table, for example. So when everything is digital, when they've eliminated, I'm not pushing forward this agenda, when they've eliminated paper money, then it all of a sudden becomes easier to surveil the money. And that's one piece. In many instances, though, we already are at that place for most people's transactions. And not to fault Bitcoin, but for most people that have purchased Bitcoin, unless they've done it directly from someone or used a peer-to-peer exchange, they've also been surveilled in that they scan their driver's license to do a know your customer check on most mainstream exchanges. But the surveillance is one piece, but what the real alarming part is what they do from there. And even the head of the Bank of International Settlements and all these big bankers and financial technocrats have even stated, we can use this, for example, to track and understand if someone's making a gun purchase. We can use this in order to encourage certain behaviors. So it's the socially engineering part through smart contracts, which is really worrisome for me. And as I shared before, this isn't some far-fetched thing. We saw in Canada during the height. In fact, I think this might have had something to do with really ending the lockdowns and a lot of this hysteria, when there was pretty much an uprising, peaceful uprising. But these commercial truckers in Canada jammed up the entire system, and they went and parked in around the Parliament building, right? And basically made a big stink. Well, the Canadian government, they not only did they shut down the bank accounts of the actual truckers, but they targeted people that donated money to the truckers and shut their bank accounts down as well. So fast forward, when these central bank digital currencies are fully implemented, it'll make it very easy to do this, not to mention, as I was sharing before, the socially engineering of behavior. A big piece of this has to do with carbon, right? A personal carbon allowance is something that the World Economic Forum is pushing. They even have a prototype, My Carbon Pass. And that's what the vaccine passport thing was kind of about as well. It wasn't about vaccines. It was about controlling people's movement. So it's a very big concern. And once those CBDCs are set up, it's very much going to be an advancement in this whole tyrannical system. That's why I'm a big proponent of decentralized cryptocurrencies, of creating close-knit communities of geographic proximity where we can get each other's back. This guy's got the chickens over here. This guy's growing the food over here. We got the plumber, the carpenter, the teacher, the masseuse, and we trade amongst ourselves, whether we barter, whether we're using old silver coins, or whether we're using cryptocurrencies. It's really important for folks that are concerned about this to start laying that groundwork now. We don't want to be caught playing catch up. It may be too late for many people.
I absolutely hear that. How inevitable do you think all this is?
That's a great question. And I toy with it because I'm a student of self-development philosophy, law of attraction, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like we're all powerful human beings. People have big platforms. People are doing amazing work within our whole freedom community, right? I do think, however, that the masses, those that aren't red-pilled or whatever, programmed folks, we're all programmed to some extent too, and it's arrogant to think that we're not. But I think that most people are just going to go along to get along. Yeah. And oftentimes there needs to be some sort of problem reaction solution situation. For example, with what happened on 9/11, this huge terror attack, that was the problem. The reaction, everybody's afraid and living in fear now. And the Fox News terror advisory alert. You know how that terror advisory alert was alarmingly similar to the graphics they used during COVID with all the case numbers.
I never saw that because I was not in the USA during 9/11. I was in the UK, so I can remember how it was reported in the UK, and I'm sure I saw bits and pieces of American media.
Sure.
But I can't really recall, 20 plus years ago, what that would have looked like. I'm sure it would have been different from your perspective.
Well, didn't y'all have 7/7? That bombing that took place in the subway?
Yeah, but nowhere near the scale. It was nowhere near the scale of casualties or resulting media coverage, and it also wasn't used. So, as I understand it, in the USA, obviously post 9/11, a lot of different acts and bills and policies were passed in the wake of it. In the UK, I don't think there was some stuff, but I don't think it was comparable. I don't think it was at the same level of such a sort of sea change in the policies and the government overreach as a result of such an incident.
Sure. Well, it's a tactic that's used when there's policies, when there's wars that the government wants the public to be okay with, because most of the time the public doesn't like war. They'll trigger something or allow something to happen. And so that's what happened with 9/11. But when it comes to CBDCs, I don't even think they're going to have to sell it very difficult to the public. They're just going to say, this is going to bring you all sorts of convenience. You're not going to have to file your 1040 for your income tax anymore. It'll automatically be withdrawn, maybe from every single payment that you get from your employer. So I do believe that much of this is inevitable. We already see the smart city agenda taking place. I was born and raised in Austin. It's just right down the road from here. I got the heck out of there in 2021 as things were getting real crazy. My wife and I bought a 10-acre homestead. Houston, Texas, down the street is even more far along with the smart city agenda. That's where.
What are they doing there? I mean, I've been to Austin and Houston recently, but I didn't personally see anything in relation to that. So what are they doing specifically there as it pertains to smart cities?
Sure. So the groundwork is being laid. It's the interconnectivity of all the surveillance cameras, for example. It's giving out incentives and bonuses to businesses, incentives mostly from the city government. And a lot of this comes from grant funding, both from the federal government and from tax-exempt organizations that are all part of this whole World Economic Forum consortium, so to speak, incentivizing businesses to self-report on their carbon output, the whole Internet of Things, right? IBM's a big spearheading, pushing this immensely, tracking the phones, Shot spotter cameras is a big thing. Shot spotter lamp posts in Houston, for example. So
Shot
anytime there's
spotter.
a
What does that
gunshot,
mean?
so anytime there's a gunshot, there's
Hmm.
cameras and microphones now in the lamp posts, right? And this is all
Oh, okay.
tied into central processing, this fusion center thing that I used to push back on back in the days, a part of it as well. Um, Recently, I uncovered in the city of Austin an initiative, and again, it's funded by tax exempt foundations and nonprofits, where they were going to all of the homeless people in the city and giving them a digital ID. And that digital ID would then be tracked a lot along with their social services to make sure that everybody's getting the services and everybody's getting the support that they need. So it's being rolled out slowly but surely. And a good chunk of it is going to have to do with environmentalism. And I've been pushing back in the city of Austin back when I used to do city government stuff against this whole Agenda 21 program. This is part of the United Nations. It was in 1992, the Rio de Janeiro Earth Summit. George H.W. Bush signed on to it, and essentially it laid out a bunch of goals for bringing humans into alignment with sustainable development. And again, it was all positioned for environmentalism. But at the end of the day, a lot of it has to do with economic controls. There's these 3 E's: environment, economy, and equity. So a lot of the social justice stuff is tied up in that equity piece as well. I even uncovered a document. It was like in 2005, and it said, we're getting a lot of pushback by calling our local initiatives Local Agenda 21. So we recommend calling it comprehensive planning instead. So I presented that, of course. And, when you pull back and see the dramatic changes that are taking place over time, you can kind of see the trend of where things are going: more control, more surveillance, an emphasis on carbon output. In the moment, it's hard to see those changes, but they're most definitely coming, and these major cities are a big part of it. So, do I think it's inevitable? The answer is yes. I do believe smart cities, central bank digital currencies will be implemented in the major cities and for most people. But the question that we need to ask ourselves is, will we go along with it? Or
Yeah.
will we go along with it in some ways because maybe someone doesn't want to give up their mortgage, which is now required to be paid in CBDCs. But in other ways, we'll build the relationships, we'll build the trade networks, we'll start investing in unconfiscatable assets. We'll move outside of the city, or if we still have a life in the city, because people have family, people have relatives, people have careers in the city. I don't want to discount that. I try to present a practical approach to all of this. It would be nice to at least have a bug out spot, or you have a friend that has 10, 20 acres and you have an arrangement with him where you park an RV out there and you go every once in a while to help in the garden, but you have a place to go if things get crazy. So I do believe it's going to be inevitable, but the work that we're doing with Live Free Academy, with this community we've created called the Freedom Cell Network, our Greater Reset activation, we're trying to encourage people to go ahead and build those relationships, those networks, those communities, those economic systems. So as this new normal gets built over here, we too are building a new normal. And in many ways, it's a return to the old way of doing things.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, human history and society definitely moves in these cycles. And I think this century, in many ways, we're actually moving back towards the way things often were thousands of years ago, just that we're doing it with technology. As you've said, instead of hot wars, it's more like these sort of tech wars. And I'm simultaneously seeing a push for increased centralization, but also an equal and opposite massive push for increased decentralization. I personally think that I think that over time, we're moving back more towards sort of like city states on a global level. I think that over the course of the century, the number of nations around the world is going to significantly increase. I don't think it's going to decrease. I talk to some people who think, oh, it's all going to merge together and become more centralized. I actually see the opposite happening. I think that I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of the century, there's, 300, 400, 500, maybe more countries. And they're going to have to fight for the best people because people are so much more mobile than they used to be. And you're right that there are certain initiatives that they're wanting to do to sort of, crack down on people moving around and flying around the world so much. But what I'm seeing, particularly as someone who actually, I live in the Middle East myself, right? I live in Dubai, which is an epitome of a city state. What's interesting about Dubai is people speak of it as it's a country, even though it's a city. So when people talk about Dubai, they often speak with it. They compare it to whole countries, and it's like, well, it's just a city. And I think you're going to get more of that. People talk about, Dubai, Singapore. There's certain pockets where this is already happening, extremely low or even 0% tax rates, tons of entrepreneurship going on. It's interesting. They're very conservative in certain ways, but very progressive in others. I also see that based on a lot of the things you're talking about, what's interesting is I've said many times that I think technology has both the potential to liberate and to enslave.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the, let's say, downsides of some of the more technologically advanced and developed countries is they can actually, in some cases, when I say they, I'm talking about the government and higher than government forces, are able to sometimes exert even more control than they can in more developing places. If you look at 2020 to 2022, I mean, most African countries, they didn't have lockdowns. They didn't have mask mandates. They couldn't tell people just work from home and do Zoom meetings and all your kids stay at home and do, all of that was a function of technology. And people often overlook that point. I mean, in 1994, they would not have been able to do all of the stuff that they did because, hey, people have got to go to work. Kids have got to go to school. We can't do Zoom meetings because Zoom does not exist. We can't just have people sitting at home. I think maybe it would have lasted maybe 2 weeks, 2 weeks of fear. And then everyone would have just been like, okay, everyone's not dying. Let's just get back to it. And that's pretty much how Africa as a continent mostly handled the whole situation, because it's like, no, we just got to get on with things. So there's a lot of interesting polarities going on here. I'm very intrigued to see how it's going to play out over the next few decades. I understand a lot of the concerns and I share a lot of the concerns you have, but I'm also optimistic in another sense, because there's this equal and opposite force. And there's also just more dissemination of information. I mean, even if you compare now, like if you look at the situation now compared to just how it was 3 or 4 years ago, it's drastically changed. Just from Elon Musk taking over Twitter and making it X, with the advent of things like Rumble, even YouTube has chilled out on some of its policies because they've had to, because of competition.
Yeah, the Overton window. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. You've got Bitcoin coming. It's like you've got CBDCs, but on the other hand, you've also got this thing called Bitcoin. Again, 20 years ago, that didn't exist. So I think it's very much up to the people en masse on an individual level and a collective level to kind of like, okay, decide which path you want to take. Do you want to go down this centralized technocracy path where these entities and individuals are, controlling everything and controlling all your movements? Or are you going to take the sovereign individual route? And whether that is homesteading and building and owning your own stuff, or this is having multiple passports and residencies and being able to just sort of switch jurisdiction as and when you need to. Oop, they're getting a little bit tough here. Okay, you know what? I'm moving myself and my family over to this place. And all these areas end up having to compete. If they want to keep people there who care about freedom and who are entrepreneurs, they actually kind of need to keep them sweet. And you don't do that by cracking down on all their freedoms. So that's a little bit of a rant, but that's just like a thought of the different ways I can potentially see this playing out. And I don't even think they're mutually exclusive. I think they could both happen at the same time.
I hear you for sure. And yeah, that really brought up a whole lot of stuff. One thing that comes to mind is I'm optimistic too. And I genuinely believe that we have the ability to create whatever life that we desire on a micro level. And then if enough of us do that, and if we have big change makers, I mean, look at the audience that you've built. Look at the platform that you've built, right? Like you have these ideas, and especially during COVID, it was a breath of fresh air, right? All your tweets would get turned into like these little memes that would be shared. That's when I first heard about you. And I was like,
That's
another
awesome.
one. Yeah, this guy,
Yeah.
So yeah, the world is what we make of it. A lot of people aren't in that space. They're caught in that hypnotic rhythm. But this is the case with Bitcoin. When I thought that when it came out and started studying it, was so excited about it because I came to it from a revolutionary spot. A lot of people come to it from number go up, which is the latest craze. But I thought it was going to end the Fed. But there's been some things that have happened that in many ways, I believe its revolutionary nature has been neutered, so to speak. And not to get into all the debate about all that stuff, but essentially where we find ourselves now is we have these ETFs. We have challenges sending smaller payments on the chain because of the fees. And then when the fees inevitably go up because there's going to be a higher demand to use Bitcoin on chain, it's going to be challenging. And a lot of the addresses that have smaller amounts of Bitcoin, $5, $20, $50 worth of Bitcoin, they're not going to be able to send it on chain. A lot of people are being pushed into the Lightning Network, but most of the Lightning Network solutions are custodial, which of course is antithetical to the peer-to-peer electronic cash. When you have a custodial product or platform, it makes it easier for that company to be pressured to do the know your customer. I just share this because there's solutions that spring up, but this network of totalitarian conspirators are very cunning. And so I believe the central bank digital currency agenda is being accelerated precisely because there was an alternative that was presented. I also believe that there is an effort to neuter and weaken Bitcoin's ability to be truly revolutionary. I'm a fan of Monero also, which is more private, right? But then on the other hand, when it comes to the cities and the transforming, like you said, with city states, there's lots of great insights and stuff to unpack there. Part of the attack from this globalist group, right? New World Order, predator class, technocrats, whatever we want to call it. Deep state is a newer iteration. We used to call it the shadow government when I first started doing conspiracy research. They, in large part, want to take out the nation state. And if they have city states, as long as the city states are going along with the program, the most recent program is the Great Reset. And as you were sharing that, I was reminded of this. It's from 1974. It was published in Foreign Affairs magazine, which is the publication of the Council on Foreign Relations. One of these I didn't know we were going to be getting so conspiratorial on the program, but this is good stuff. So this guy named Richard Gardner, who was part of the Bilderberg Group, the Council on Foreign Relations, he published this thing called The Hard Road to World Order. And what he talks about, he says, in the end, an end run around national sovereignty will accomplish much more than the old-fashioned frontal assault. And he says what we need to do in order to implement this global government that the Council on Foreign Relations is pushing, all these organizations are pushing, is erode national sovereignty piece by piece. And instead of a top-down attack, it's a bottom-up attack. So I'm with you. And like you said, it's nuanced and there's this tension and a push and a pull. And then as the cycles go, the pendulum swings to centralization or the pendulum swings to like radical leftist social cultural agenda. And then there's a pushback and the conservatives and more traditional and religious groups are like, what the heck? That was too far, right? And there's always a synthesis in the middle or the civilizations clash and there's a civil war perhaps. But I do believe that even though we could have decentralization and a rise of city-states, those city-states could in many ways still be going along with this fourth industrial revolution, this smart city agenda, track and trace, control carbon credits, to where now it's not the federal government or a national government that's pushing it, but the city-states are on board as well. And that's precisely what my research with Agenda 21 led me to conclude. They couldn't get the Congress to pass legislation top down, especially when Republicans were in power. So they skipped the Congress. When I say they, these global institutions, the United Nations, for example, and they went straight to the cities and they launched an organization called the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives. And then you didn't even have to have the Congress. You didn't have to have the governor on board. You just went straight to the cities and funded a lot of these programs for greater surveillance, carbon tracking, so on and so forth. But like I said, it's up to us really at the end of the day.
Yes.
I don't think the masses are going to they just go along with the program. And a lot of people are worried about that, but the masses never change the course of history. It's the radicals. It's the people that are willing to speak out. It's the people that are crazy enough to think they can change history in the future, right? They're the ones that actually do. So it's up to us, those folks that are listening to this. What do you want the future to look like? Because you have all the power to create that future for yourself, which is easier to do. But if enough of us can tap into that space and really step into our true power, then we can have ripples and waves that actually do affect the course of history. Satoshi Nakamoto did just that. You're doing it in many ways with your platform, empowering people, getting them to live healthier, getting them to see through all this nonsense, right? So I do remain optimistic, but we need to not ever underestimate our enemies, those that are trying to push back on Team Human, right?
For sure. It's funny that what you just said there made me kind of chuckle to myself, because I'm aware there are people out there who are so deep down the rabbit hole and they've become so paranoid that they're 100% convinced that I'm a controlled op, and Alex
Yeah.
Jones is controlled op, and I'm sure you've been accused of being a controlled op, and
It's a
I
badge
was
of
actually,
honor.
yeah, I was actually going to ask. I mean, not for yourself, but for people in general. What do you think is the line between being informed and questioning and wanting to be prepared, and outright paranoia?
Mm.
Because I have certainly seen an overcorrection into the latter, in particular over the couple years. I mean, when everyone is just being accused of being, whether it's Illuminati or part of the globalist elite or controlled opposition. That was a really popular one, particularly in 2022, 2023. And, these accusations are just flying out about everyone. In fact, the more that someone tries to speak up for the people and speak up for liberty and freedom, just the fact that they gain any type of following or popularity to such people becomes evidence that they're part of the club. They
Yep.
won't tell you what club it is. I don't know what club it is, but apparently I'm part of it, and lots of people I know are part of it. So there's certainly a line there. So yeah, so to ask the question succinctly, what do you think is the line between preparedness and paranoia?
That's a great question, and I've contemplated that myself because having done this for so long, you see it in different waves, of course. And I used to run. I started off my activism and my purpose in the conspiracy world, and I used to listen to Alex Jones every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday when I would walk around on Texas State University for hours on end with my headphones, and I thought I was so superior to everyone else because I knew what was going on, but really I was freaked out the whole time. And so I've been accused of that. And it's the same thing. Like, he has so many followers, he must be part of the team. And my stuff isn't getting any reach. So it
Yep.
must be being suppressed, even though what you're saying resonates with people and it's some really hard hitting stuff. And what they're saying is just like, well, it's not really playing very well. So I'm not to say that there aren't algorithms suppressing this and that, but most of the time that's not what's happening. You just have crappy content. Anyway, this is a realization that I had on this front. And I had it recently in regards to Elon Musk, because I have
Good
been a
example.
big fan and admirer of Elon Musk.
Mhm.
And I get a lot of pushback, especially in this whole
Oh yeah.
conspiratorial freedom world. In fact, we have two Teslas. I'm a huge fan of Tesla
Oh yeah,
automobiles.
dude.
They are.
I interviewed him. I got all sorts after that one. I mean,
Oh
every
yeah.
type of reaction you can imagine.
Uh-huh. I watched that interview. It was a great interview, by the way. And
Oh,
I was
thank you.
cheering you on, like, wow, you got to interview Elon Musk. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So get tons of pushback. And the way that I see it, and the realization that I had after touring the Gigafactory, I tried to get a tour, tried to be there for the launch party. I wasn't able to pull it off. I thought I was connected here in Austin, but I wasn't able to get an invite. Um, but I committed to my kids. One of these days, I'm going to take you on a tour of that factory because it's so big and grand. It inspires me as an entrepreneur, as an activist, as a change agent, what he's been able to pull off, right? And so finally, we were able to get that from a friend that works there. We were put in this little lottery thing. We got it anyway. And as I was there touring, I was seeing how big and grand it is. The many innovations that just Tesla alone, not to mention SpaceX landing a rocket, reusable rocket. That's a pretty big deal. Um, and I came to realize, when I think of Elon Musk, he's not perfect, and you can look at him from conspiratorial view, and he's cozy with the Department of Defense and launching spy satellites. But I believe that's all part of a means to an end to his ultimate vision, which is to make humans a multiplanetary species. And so he knows he's got to play nice with the federal government in order to get the ability to even do that. But as I was there, I was thinking, like, one of my core identities is an entrepreneur. And that's why I take so much inspiration from Elon Musk, because he is one hell of an entrepreneur. And anyone that would say otherwise, or that he's funded by like emerald mine money from his dad, or like he gets all this money from the federal government. There was like some loans here and there, but he paid them back with interest. Anyway, the reason why it inspires me, because I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a Grant Cardone 10x think big guy. And how bigger can you think than I want to create an impact on planet Earth? I want to completely shift the automotive industry towards electric, and I want to put humans on Earth. That's my identity, entrepreneur. So that's what I see when I examine Elon Musk. A lot
On
of
Mars.
people's core identity is conspiracy theorist. And
Mhm.
so with everything, with Zuby finding success, having a big reach, with Elon Musk doing this or that, that's all they see. That's how they view the world, through a lens of conspiratorial view of history. And I tell you what, in my view, that's one of the most impotent identities that one could have, because all you do is obsess over the problem. And as a
Yes.
firm believer in the law of attraction, the more that you research the New World Order, the more you'll see it everywhere, the more you live in fear, and the more you're taken away from your true purpose or your path. Maybe you haven't even thought about what your purpose is, because your purpose is to quote unquote wake people up. But in
Mhm.
all reality, a lot of people that are solely focused on that are simply word vomiting all over everybody and turning them off and not even reaching people. So that's what I would say. I don't even think it's a thin line. I think that
Yeah.
there's a problem. There is definitely a conspiracy, and the
Yes.
conspiratorial view of history is accurate in my view. But the question we need to ask ourselves is, what the heck are we going to do about it? Because just waking a bunch of people up, freaking a bunch of people out, watching endless documentaries on Rumble, trying to tear down people that are making a positive impact in the world, that ain't going to get you nowhere. What we need to do is study the problem so we can overcome it, and then actually go out there and build the systems that will be needed to insulate
Mhm.
ourselves from what's to come.
Absolutely. Man, that's totally correct. I think it's a horseshoe theory type thing, just like similar with politics, how the far left and far right can end up being very close to each other. I think conspiratorial thinking taking to its extreme level is basic. It ends up becoming as impotent, to use your term, as someone who is just totally plugged in and totally gullible, thinks that everything on the mainstream news is totally true and unbiased, and they don't even think about any of this stuff. They're calling everyone who even dares question anything a conspiracy theorist, or an anti-vaxxer
Mhm.
or a fascist or whatever it is. Like, just they defend all the systems. They think the government is their friend. Like, it ends up being just as disempowering. And something else about that worldview is I've learned over time that it doesn't allow for heroes. No
Mm.
one is right. It rejects the concept that anyone can truly be on your side or on the side of liberty and freedom and actually make an impact, because
Mm.
by your own thinking, as soon as they get to that level, they're approaching it, it means that they've sold their soul. Oh my gosh, they're popular, they've got X amount of followers. I've literally had people I've seen. I mean, what's interesting about social media is you can see conversations even if you're not quite part of them. So, I've seen conversations that are about me or that are about other people that I know, and I'm just seeing what these people are saying. And I've seen comments, for example, literally saying, this guy has 1 million followers. You can't get to 1 million followers without selling your soul. Therefore, he's obviously part of the club. And it's just like, okay, that's a really interesting statement. So you think that anybody who's past a certain threshold of popularity, following, whatever it may be, it doesn't matter how they did it, it doesn't matter how long it took them. In my case, 15 plus years, it doesn't matter. It just, once they're on that thing, or, oh my gosh, that person spoke to Joe Rogan, and we think Joe Rogan is also a controlled op. So therefore now this person who spoke to him, and it's just like, wow, okay, so you can't have any type of hero, right? Like, the biggest you can get is maybe a couple thousand followers who all also are as deep down the rabbit hole as you, and you all just kind of reinforce each other and call everybody else shills and controlled ops and whatever. And you never have any solutions, right? There's no solution, as you said. It's just, the world is ending, the globalist elites, the lizards, the whatever, like they're going to win. And it's like, okay, well, if everyone were to adopt that worldview, then it does become inevitable. Because what's the point of fighting? If you think it is truly that hopeless and all of this is inevitable and there's nothing that you, any of us can do, then what's the point? Why would you even want people to fight? It's like, okay, cool. You may as well just, stamp the barcodes on us, give us our bugs to eat, put us in our pods, and cool. Like, let's just do it. That's not what I want. But I don't think a lot of people realize that that's ultimately what that worldview leads to. Plus, it's just miserable. Like, I can't imagine walking around all day long having that mindset, because I would just become a very miserable, unhappy person, and I would not be capable of trusting anybody, not even people close to me.
And I had that mindset for a while
Mm.
when I was just all into the Alex Jones. And I remember going on cross-country road trips with my family, begging them to listen to my conspiratorial documentaries with a CD, because I had them all burned on CDs and stuff too, and pointing out every little corporate logo we would drive by. It was all a symbol of the New World Order, right? But you know what was coming up for me as you were sharing that? Just as people that believe rich folks that have more income, are like evil or corrupt or greedy, that limits that person who shares that mindset. It limits their ability to produce wealth for themselves. So, just the same, somebody that considers themselves an activist or a truther or wants to contribute good to the world, for them to view Zuby or somebody that's successful in social media as some negative thing, they're co-opted, then they're necessarily subconsciously telling themselves, I can never get big because that means that I'm a bad person. That means I'm part of the New World Order. I think a lot of it has to do with taking comfort. First of all, a lot of it has to do with being attracted to fear. And just like, why do we go on roller coasters? Because it puts us in this fear mode and some cortisol drops, but we know it's safe at the end of the day. So I think if you go back to, early humans, life was not so safe. It was more dangerous. There could be a predator around the corner. Maybe there were warring tribes, so to speak. Now we got it cookie cutter comfort. So people seek out that fear in a safe manner. They seek out drama. Why so many people addicted to the television, the drama, and especially social media drama? It's just the same. I had that. There was some drama about me maybe a couple years ago, and this is by now. I'm like, I don't get involved in the drama, but I was watching, and I found myself going back to this group and checking to see if anybody had said anything else. I wasn't engaging because I'm not going to give them my energy, but I was giving them my energy, and I thought to myself, like, wow. Obviously, all these people are really bought into this drama about me. They don't even know me. But here I am going back to look at it. And I was like, wow, we do really literally live in like a soap opera society where everyone just turns to the drama. So, of course, some really good drama is there's a new world order seeking to destroy us. And here's their latest plot and plan. And it in many ways, people are drawn towards that because it kind of simulates that fear and discomfort and danger that people desire. Most of the people, too, probably have no real adventure in their lives. But I think it's a comforting, simple thing to do, to argue, to complain, to point the finger at other people as controlled opposition. What's more challenging is to take a good, hard look in the mirror, recognize what faults we may have within ourselves, what's holding us back from living our ideal life. Because I tell you what, the people that are out there creating, building, producing, adding value to other people's lives, we have very little time to go deep down the rabbit hole all day to point the finger and to call other people controlled opposition because we're too busy building a better world and building a better life for ourselves. That's the hard work, coming to terms with our own internal demons, pushing through discomfort and trying new things, facing setbacks and adversity, but leveraging that as fuel to become better versions of ourselves. That's the hard work. And a lot of people just are unwilling to put in that work. And it's easier just to resonate in this little fear space, point the finger space, and feel like you're doing something good for humanity.
I hear that. So, John, what can people do for people who are listening to this and they're thinking, gosh, I'm worried about CBDCs or smart cities or just the way that cities are going and the way my local politics is going, whatever it may be? What can people do? What's your advice for them?
Okay, well, when it comes to the CBDC stuff, highly encourage folks, if you have not yet, to learn to use cryptocurrency. So, I was sharing, I think Bitcoin isn't as revolutionary it was as peer-to-peer electronic cash, but it most definitely is still valuable to protect wealth, to preserve wealth, to grow wealth, unconfiscatable if you're self-custodying your cryptocurrency. So I'm a fan of Bitcoin as digital gold, and I'm a big fan of Monero as like a peer-to-peer privacy-based electronic currency. So if you care about the CBDCs and you still want to do business online with other freedom lovers without having to comply with this or that, or have potentially your ability to buy and sell goods and services shut off, then you need to learn this technology, because I believe cryptocurrency is going to be the only way we can do business with one another online outside of their control grid. Self-custodied peer-to-peer cryptocurrency. Also, you got to find people in your local area. go ahead and start doing business with folks that accept crypto or that will trade or barter or whatever. It's really important because, again, it's a frog in the boiling pot. This stuff happens slow but sure, and then there'll be a crisis and advances rapidly, just like we saw with COVID. So build those relationships. I like to say, to overcome the CBDCs, you got to do the 3 C's: cryptocurrency, also alternative currencies like silver, or if people have a time bank currency or whatever, or just barter. And then you got to engage in commerce. You got to go ahead and start the flow of goods and services, both providing them, buying them from other people. And then you got to build community. You got to have people that are on the same wavelength that are going to buck the system along with you when the time comes. The 3 C's: crypto, commerce, community. And then when it comes to the smart cities, we're actually hosting an event. It's called the Exit and Build Land Summit. That's one of the things we do at Live Free Academy. We do webinars, workshops, and in-person events. In-person events are super powerful. We had you perform at the Greater Reset concert. Everybody's jumping around. There's just a connection and energy that comes, right? The webinars are great. Online summits are great, but really showing up in person is super powerful. So we got this event coming up. It's May 17th through the 19th. People can join for free and watch the first day and a half online. You can get a virtual immersion pass, watch the whole conference. It's 3 days. You get the replays. You get to ask questions of the speakers, or you can join us in person. There's farm tours on the 1st and 5th day, the 16th and 20th, for those that join in person, which is pretty cool. You'll be able to eat food during lunch from the farms that you visit. We got a really cool cast of speakers, and really we're just trying to empower people, to teach them the knowledge and the skills, but also to motivate and inspire them and help overcome limiting beliefs. We'll have Joel Salatin as our keynote speaker. He spoke before. We have JP Sears, who's local here in Central Texas. He always has really powerful message that's fun and enlightening as well. Jack Spirko, the Survival Podcast. This guy, Matt Powers. Molly Englehart, who recently transitioned her California vegan-only restaurant to add meat because she had this realization about regenerative agriculture. Livestock has a big role. She's getting a lot of pushback, but it's a great event.
I was going to say that couldn't have gone down well with some of her audience.
Yeah, they tried to cancel her on Instagram, but thankfully the whole movement that really gets it on the other side is very popular. She's getting all sorts of support as well. So yeah, the website's exitandbuildlandsummit.com, exitandbuildlandsummit.com. So we'll explore a bit of the problem if folks want to learn more about this whole smart city agenda, but it's more about empowering people to exit the cities. I call it the urban exit the cities, to buy land cooperatively, or maybe you rent an RV or rent a room at someone's place that's out in the country. And we build really tight-knit communities. So a whole lot of it is about building freedom communities and then connecting these freedom communities. Much like you said, there's big city states like Dubai that have much more freedom than other areas just down the street. What we're aiming to do is just let 1,000 freedom communities bloom. And then we interconnect these freedom communities. We support one another through trade, mutual aid, commerce, and ultimately we create an environment where we can decouple ourselves from this beast system that's come into fruition. It's all about people taking action and taking responsibility for their lives, not just for us and our families, but more importantly, so we can leave a lasting legacy of liberty for future generations to come, so they're not born into a digital ID enslavement system. They're born into a family that loves them, surrounded by a tribe of families that support them, that share the same values. That's what this event's all about. So yeah, people got to take responsibility and really see where things are going, but don't focus on the problem. Focus on where it is that you want to go and make sure you take massive action towards those ends.
Amen. Let's focus on solutions. John, it's been awesome having you on the show, man. Really respect you and always glad to hear your insights. So thank you for sharing them.
Thanks, Zuby. Appreciate you.